This episode is brought to you by the V1 Project. Before we dive into today's episode of the LiftAffect podcast, I want to tell you about something that's really quite special to me. It's called the V1 Project, and it's all about bringing professional pilots together to create a supportive community. You know, being a pilot is more than just a job. It's a way of life. The V1 Project is here to help you cultivate a core set of values and virtues that will help you enhance not just your career, but all aspects of your life. Many of you have reached out and asked about the LiftAffect Mental Skills course for value-based living. While we're not offering that course right now as a standalone course, we have included it as the first 4 months of the V1 Project. So if you want to take that course, you got to go into the V1 Project to get it. But here's the thing. The V1 Project is not just about what you learn, it's about who you meet. It's all about building a strong sense of community. Picture yourself surrounded by like-minded individuals, all on a journey to better themselves and to support each other. Our motto says it all. V1 is a place for professional pilots to build community, cultivate and develop and express a core set of values and virtues for optimal living in a supportive community with encouragement and professional guidance. So if you're a professional pilot looking for something more, something that'll take your career and your life to the next level, head on over to thev1project.com. That's www.thev1, as in the number 1, not O-N-E, but 1, project.com. Join the V1 Project today, and let's go. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the LiftAffect podcast. I am your host, Matt McNeil, founder, clinical director, and director of human performance at LiftAffect, where we assist professional pilots with maintaining better mental health and optimizing their mental skills. The goal of this podcast is simple: to help pilots and other high liability professionals and disciplines come out of the shadows to discover how we can live better lives personally and professionally. Join us each episode as we discuss various topics ranging from mental health, mental skills and performance, to business, entrepreneurship, and a few other surprises along the way.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another LiftAffect podcast. I'm your host, Karl Keller, and beside me, or actually on the other side of the screen, is my dear friend, Matt McNeil. Buddy, here we go again. It's another day. It's another day. Episode, another podcast.
More shenanigans.
And they keep rolling. And as we were just in our pre-warm-up, we were saying so much buffoonery.
Thank God for the Lord. Edit button.
Yeah, I swear. You know, one of these days we might do something live, but thank God for pre-recorded sometimes, because every now and then we get a little carried away. But getting to the end of the week, buddy.
I know.
Look at that. They didn't even generate a response other than I know. That's pretty bad.
I know. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, just catatonic. I know.
Yeah.
Oh, my Lord.
Here we are.
I have a feeling it's going to be one of those kind of podcasts.
Yeah. Aren't you so happy you showed up to listen, everybody? It's so great.
Yes. This is what you're listening to while you're driving. Oh, my God.
This is the crap we have to okay.
Yeah. But, on that note, as we tell everybody on every episode to please send in their comments at podcast@liftaffect.com, we have received quite a few. But there's one podcast episode that seems to have generated a tremendous amount of comments. Mm-hmm. And we're going to kind of lump them together today in a big picture, and Matt is just going to kind of run with it. But we had one on our marriage podcast episode. We generated a tremendous amount of comments, and they still keep coming in. And we wanted to kind of just talk about it in general, because there's a common theme that seems to be running through them, and about struggling with intimacy, how to deal with relationships that are I don't know if not broken, fractured, and struggling. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to kind of just open the door and just say, hey, go a little bit on those, because those were different variations. I mean, but they all seem to really focus on those two among all of the others out there. Those were the two that seemed to have the most comments. Yeah. And I wanted to just kind of open it up and let you take it from there. This is something that obviously we all struggle with, regardless of whether we're a pilot or just basically an everyday, common laborer. We all, marriage is a challenge, and nobody gets it right. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on how to deal with intimacy, or when you're losing intimacy and struggling with it after it's kind of like you had it and now you don't, and you're kind of lost. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
That's like such a massive question.
It is.
I'm not even sure where to start. I mean, I can tell you one of the things that I got a lot of questions about was what is the divorce rate among pilots? The divorce rate, and I will say I don't know of any study that's been done, and I did a little bit of research. I couldn't really find a whole lot on this, but divorce rates among pilots, we know in our industry it's high. I think it's just high in general. The divorce rate is high. It's somewhere around 40 to 50%, depending on some factors, which we can talk about. But we know in our industry, there's that joke, you're not a pilot unless you're divorced 2 or 3 times, and you married a flight attendant at some point. That's kind of like, or they used to call it's crude and crass, but they called it, AIDS, airline inflicted divorce syndrome. There's a lot of divorce, and I think there's some pretty obvious reasons why that is. Displacement, being gone, loneliness, lack of connection, lack of proximity. These things lead to divorces, and relationships need to be nurtured. That's the one thing that is, the research shows that if you don't nurture a relationship, it tends to, just goes on autopilot, and then it can stagnate. Because life happens and people grow at different rates. And if you're not attending to that, it can start to get out of control. But I mean, if we just look at divorce rates in general, so demographic groups, there's different divorce rates, region of the country. There's lots of different ways of subcategorizing what is the rate of divorce. So, but one of the things that was what a big question was, what are the divorce rates? And then the other was, I got a lot of questions about, does monogamy work? Let's talk about what monogamy is. So monogamy, for people that don't know, which I think most people do, but some people might not really understand what that means, but it's a type of relationship where an individual has only one partner at a time. And whether it works, it varies on many factors, including the specific individuals involved, what their values are, the dynamics of their relationship. Monogamy it's practice. It's a widely practiced form of relationship in many cultures, including ours, which is why we have something called marriage. And it can be very successful and fulfilling for many people. It provides people with a roadmap or a framework for trust, for commitment, for emotional intimacy, and it involves a level of connection and stability and support. And so that's why I think there's this idea about monogamy. And the question is, people framed in this, does monogamy work? Are we biologically driven to be monogamous? Because if we are, why is there so much cheating?
Well, can I ask you a question on monogamy? We always talk about it, and whenever you hear it, it's always talked about in terms of physical sex, sexually. Mm-hmm. But can you be? You made a comment that triggered something. What about being emotionally monogamous?
Right.
So in other words, you're connected emotionally to someone else for whatever reason, mm-hmm. even though you're maybe physically with one person.
Right.
I mean, because everybody always looks at it just in the physical, but to me, emotionally monogamous can be just as challenging. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times couples, they'll come and they'll seek therapy because they're saying this person is emotionally cheating. And sometimes, one will say there is no emotional cheating. But emotional cheating is just a term used to describe a situation where one partner that's in a committed relationship develops a strong emotional connection or intimacy with someone outside of the relationship, which can be considered a breach of trust and emotional infidelity and emotional cheating. So what does that look like? So how do you determine, what's emotional cheating and what's not? So people say, no, I just have a really good friendship with this person. Well, emotional cheating, as I would define it, and I think as the theories of relationship defines it, is when you're sharing like intimate thoughts, feelings, personal details with someone other than a partner, and it can involve romantic or sexual sort of innuendic undertones. And so while there may not be physical or sexual involvement, emotional infidelity can be highly damaging to a relationship. Because the problem is that it erodes trust, and it can break the bond between partners. It's important to establish what your boundaries are, because people have different boundaries of what is acceptable and what is not. A lot of that is cultural, I'll say as well. Different cultures have different levels of boundaries. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It's just what's accepted within that culture. And so I think it's crucial for couples to have open and honest communication about what their expectations are and their boundaries regarding emotional connections outside of the relationship. Because communicating, trust, mutual respect, these things are just vital in the ability to maintain a healthy and a relationship that's actually gives you some fulfillment. So back to where we were at, like emotional cheating, I think it is a real thing. I think it's the boundaries of it are how you define it. Now, physical cheating, that's a real thing. What are the boundaries of it? I mean, I think you can come up with that. We don't need to get into what that is. But if you're having, physical intimacy with somebody else, that is considered cheating. And people do it. People do it all the time. And so let's get back to this idea does monogamy work? Because it's widely practiced, but monogamy is not the only valid or successful model of relationships. Some individuals find that other forms of relationship like polygamy or open relationships work better for them. What matters most is that the relationship structure aligns with the needs, the desires, and most importantly, the values of the people involved, and that there's clear, as a crystal clear communication and consent around what that is. So people say, can it work? I think in my experience, and look, we've got a therapist at LiftAffect that I brought on that's a marriage and family therapist because he really specializes in that. I do marriage counseling, but not a lot, and I don't typically do it. I send that out to Brian. In my experience, those kinds of relationships don't work. They can. I have seen them work, but it usually does not. In my experience, it does not work because both sides are not totally invested in that model. Usually somebody's sort of more being pulled into that model of an open relationship where somebody wants more commitment, the other person doesn't. And the problem with that I've seen is where they try to make that work is at some point somebody feels like they're being pushed out. And so it typically, in my experience, doesn't work. Not to say it can't, because it can. And I have seen some situations where it does work. It's just that's the arrangement. That's how they do it. But most of the time, and I think it's hard too, is if you started in a committed relationship and then you want to move into an open relationship, that does not seem to work. Now, there's a very famous couples therapist named Esther Perel, and I think she's got a podcast on the internet. She's written a couple of books. One of her books is called Mating in Captivity. And she really explores this idea of intimacy and does this work for us because the divorce rate is so freaking high. It's crazy, crazy high. What are your thoughts, Karl?
It is high. And I think part of it is we have so many more choices now than it used to be because of our mobility. 200 years ago, you were lucky if you met one or two people in your life that you connected with. And most of the time, a lot of times, marriage or families were created out of necessity. So you were the only one available. It didn't make a difference whether you were or weren't compatible. Mm-hmm. Now, and I guess the thing is, there are so many people in the world. For somebody to say, and this is my opinion, and it's worth the plug nickel that you pay for it, is that if you meet enough people, you're gonna. People say, "Oh, well, there's only one person I could ever love and fall in love with." There are multiple people out in the world. There's just so many people that have very similar personalities and stuff. The key is to be comfortable and satisfied with what you have, instead of constantly looking. The perfect person doesn't exist. Yeah. And I think people sit there and they have this expectation, and when their mate doesn't live up to all of them, and they meet someone else that has a piece that they're missing or that they want, all of a sudden now they gravitate and say, "Hey, this is the piece I've been missing in my life that I wish my mate had."
Yeah.
And I think that we have unreasonable expectations at times.
That's
just my opinion.
I totally agree with you, and that is an issue. There's a wonderful book that one of my clients actually sent me, and it just showed up. We send each other books all the time. He's a big book reader, and so we're always sort of just Amazoning each other.
Thank God you're not.
Other books. Yeah, right, exactly. But he sent me this. Stephen, thank you for this, buddy. I just love it, and it's a book called Dedicated by a guy named Pete Davis, and the subtitle is "The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing," and it's so true. I think we've gotten, because the options are unlimited. we feel that we've got to always keep our options open. And I'll talk to everybody I talk to. I mean, here's what I notice in my practice. Let's get into this. I like where this is going. I have lots of clients that are dating, and they're all using apps to date. And now some of you are out there that will have good experiences. I know people have gotten married on they discovered their partner on Match.com or whatever. But and you can make the case that, well, if they're talking to me, they're unhappy, right? Right. But that's not true, actually.
I'm talking to you. Yeah, I'm not sure what that says.
Right. I think that's this misconception too about therapy, is you just got to be miserable to go to therapy. I've got a lot of clients, especially for coaching, that are just looking to keep improving. They just want to, it's just self-development. But I don't know of a single person that I'm working with that uses social media apps for dating and is happy with that. I can't name a single client. They are effing miserable in that department. And so let's break that down, right? What's the chief complaint is that people misrepresent who they are. So, you got the picture and the profile, and then you go and you meet them, and it's like, what? Where is the person that you presented? This is nothing like the person that you presented. Or
it's a 20-year-old picture.
Right, it's a 20-year-old picture, which is what people do. I know. It's like, but that, something that breaks my heart about that. Like, you have to be so ashamed of who you are that you put up a fake, an old picture because you're so ashamed. Like, that makes me want to cry. That's so painful. So that's the one complaint. The second complaint is that everybody's dating like 50 people. They're going on 6 dates a week, different people that it's this constant open buffet of people. And the third complaint is, which I've observed this, I observed this watching in the flight deck and, other people, it's like, how in the hell do you determine who you like by swiping inside 3 seconds? Swipe, 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 swipe. Well, it's like we've taken this idea of connection and brought it down into a soundbite. It's like it's pathetic.
Well, as a general rule, men are more visually oriented, women are more content oriented, so to speak. So I think from the swiping, from a man's perspective, he's looking who looks visually appealing, and then they stop to find out a little bit more. I always used to say there's a saying: the wrappings grabs your attention, the contents of the box keeps it. A pretty wrapped box that has nothing inside of it is useless. But if you can get past the visual aspects and look at what the person's inside of it, there are some beautiful souls out there that, they're not, if all you're looking for is physical beauty, there are rare exceptions where this doesn't hold true. And that is that as we age, our external beauty starts to fade. Our skin isn't as firm and things start to sag and start to go in places that you really didn't want. So, and if that's all that's there, I think all of a sudden you're going, well, you're no longer attractive to me, or you're too heavy. And I think people can create reasons why they don't want to, just because you no longer look like what you used to. And I'm talking about men now more than women, although I'm sure it happens with them women too. But I think that's a issue.
And look, there's so many things in our society that are pushing us to just keep our options open. And this is a relentless sort of, just internet Facebook behavior, like scrolling. It's the constant scroll. I mean, there was a great book written by the guy that invented the scrolling thing for Facebook. Nir Ayiz, I think his name is, but he wrote a book called Indistractable, I think, and it, this stuff has really polluted our minds. It's polluted our social fabric in many respects. So, but okay, let's get back to, so there's marriage issues. So what are the marriage issues? We talked about it before, and people really connected with this because the response was huge. So the things to look out for, I just use the Gottman framework, right? There's a lot of different frameworks of relationship, but I think I agree with it. The research agrees with it. When there are patterns of criticism, of contempt, of defensiveness, and of stonewalling, that's called the Four Horsemen. Those are indicators that there's improvements that need to be made to the relational dynamics. And so one of the things, so what do? Okay, you got these issues. Sweeping them under the rug isn't going to make them get better. And as everyone here can attest that's got these issues, ignoring them does not change them. And
it makes them worse.
It makes them worse. And here's one of the problems that pilots suffer with is we get to go on the road. So, right, we're like, well, can't deal with it, gotta go. And so then we have these periods of absence, and then we can come back, and then we always have this eject button. I got a trip, gotta go, can't deal with this. And I think that's why the divorce rate is high, is just the proximity issue. Maybe there's something about our personalities that makes us avoidant of emotional stuff. Pilots say, I compartmentalize. Yeah, that's adaptive. There's good times. There's times where that's needed. Like when you're flying a Cat 2, I'd rather you be thinking about the Cat 2 than thinking about your marriage. But compartmentalizing all the time is foolish and emotionally unhealthy and vacant. And so it doesn't behoove you to do that. So you got these issues. So what do? One is awareness. Okay, I have these issues. Step one. Huge, great. Well, I mean, you can't, if you don't know you're stalling, you can't recover from a stall. I mean, so that is really important to just have the awareness. Secondly, I wouldn't necessarily just, especially if your relationship is already hot, it's unstable, you can't really have these conversations without them leading to one of those four issues. It might be good to get professional intervention on that. And don't worry, you don't have to report relationship counseling to the FAA. They don't care about that. So just you have nothing to lose by approaching that. And people avoid therapy because they say, well, I don't want to make it worse. That is like having an infection and saying, I don't want to go to the doctor because I don't want to make it worse. I mean, I get the fear, but if it's brewing in there, you're just suffering, and it doesn't just go away on its own. So you recognize that you have those issues, and then maybe have a conversation around, hey, I think that there's some things in our relationship that I would like to improve on with you. An essential element that of what the Gottmans talk about, they talk about this concept of emotional bids. Emotional bids are small attempts for emotional connection and communication made by one partner to another. And these bids can be verbal, they can be nonverbal, they can range from attempting to share a thought or a feeling or just a simple question. And what the research shows is that the way partners respond to each other's little bids significantly affects the quality of the relationship. So responding positively, engaging with an emotional bid strengthens connection, while like maybe ignoring or dismissing the bid can create distance and upheaval, pain in there. And so building a culture of appreciation and fondness within a relationship is a huge factor in relationships being successful. When I work with a couple, I encourage them to regularly express genuinely, not fake, okay, but genuine admiration, a little bit of gratitude, just a little bit of affection for each other. And by, cultivating some good interactions and really an understanding of what the other needs, you can create a strong foundation or repair a broken foundation for a relationship that probably will be able to stand the test of time. That's just one little thing you can do. It doesn't have to be big, right? It's like, yeah, okay, coming home with the flowers and the chocolates and all this stuff that it's like that's a huge act. Like, start with just the small stuff, the micro stuff on a day-to-day with real authenticity. That's a good place to start. And one of the questions I ask couples when they come in is they come in and they're ready to fight, right? It's like, you do this. It's like World War III. And I just let this thing erupt, and I'll sit there and it's just lobbing grenades back and forth and back and forth. And when I'm sort of done with it, when I've kind of had enough, I will tell them to shut up nicely. And I will ask this really simple question. What brought you two together? Go back. Something brought you two together. There was some kind of... Tell me about the first time you felt that with each other. And it's amazing how, the states change, because there's this recognition of okay, we're not all just this. There was something underneath that was really good. And can we start from the place of good? And it's not because I'm trying to put rainbows and unicorns around things, put a bow on everything, but it's like work from the emotional state of gratitude and appreciation and of fulfillment to start to examine where the foundation started to crack, versus let's start from the toilet, try to work our way back, and so I think you can even do that in your own life. If you're suffering in your relationship and you're like, God, should I stay or should I go? I don't know if I even love this person anymore. Well, go back and just reflect for a moment. Close your eyes and just change your state. What did I see when I first fell in love with this person? What was the look on my face? How did I breathe? How did I hold myself? And just breathe that in for a moment, just to capture that emotional state. And then start to work from a place of a little bit of appreciation, a little bit of gratitude for at least the foundation that was poured, as you start to examine what was built on top of it.
communication is so important with things. What happens now? Because little gestures, little things like that are like most of the time are very, like you say, they're nonverbal. What about being able to express yourself when you don't even know how to do it anymore? Yeah. Where it's so awkward that you don't even know how to start a conversation other than, how's the weather? The meaningless stuff, something that has a little bit of value to each other. How do you do that?
So you start by being able to identify negative patterns, learning how to actively listen to one another, learning effective, adaptive expression of emotions. These are some real basic, and this is where therapy works. Couples therapy works because what happens is you get people together and you realize they can't even listen, they can't even hear each other. And so, what I'll ask is, one person will say something and I'll say to the other one, what did he just say? And they'll repeat back what they think, and it's not even close. Right? And it was like, okay, hold on. Right?
Do that with your child. You see, it happens right there.
Yeah, exactly.
What did I just say?
Right. I mean, and so it's like we've gotten so blurred by our own emotional activation that we don't even know how to listen correctly. And so being able to retune some of that, like, okay, let me just see if I can repeat what this person said. Not whether I agree with it or whether it's right or wrong, but let me just see if I'm hearing what this person is saying. And then the other person, invitation to repair. Okay, well, didn't quite get it. Say it again. Okay, now what did that person say, right? So it's just retuning the piano. It's like tuning a guitar string, right? It's out of tune. It's like wah 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 because you get the resonant frequency, right? You got to start tuning it to get it to start to harmonize a little bit.
In my case, you got to get new wires.
You get new wires, yeah. Well, sometimes you need new wires.
Yeah,
but I think you start with like the bloody fundamentals. Everything is the fundies. It's all fundamentals. It's not the sexy delusional, well, we've got to recommit our vows or go on a big vacation. It's like, you can't even listen. You can't even understand each other. How is Acapulco going to help that? It's like, that's not, you need to start with just figuring out how do we listen? And then how do we manage our expression of emotions? Like, you can learn some skills around how to do that. You can get some tools for problem solving and for better negotiation.
Two things that come to mind is, one, you have to be willing to make the effort. And the second one is, it's not about who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
Because the conversations, if you want to call them that, arguments, disputes, become so defensive and confrontational because you've got to prove your point, or you've got to show that you're right or that they're wrong. All that does is close people down and instead of open up. I think that, and I've seen that in so many different venues, that it's not about who's right. It's about, I said like my airline, it's not about who's right. It's what's right. And take that piece out and go, I want this to work. This means something to me. This has value. And go from that perspective, not then they have to see my way or they're wrong and I'm going to show them why they're wrong. That is a recipe for continuation of what you've got.
Yep. I agree. Totally agree. Maybe that's just a couple things that people can start to implement in their life. And like I said on the last, when we talked about this, I said, if you want to go get counseling and your partner doesn't want to, say, that's fine. I'm going anyway. And I'm going to go to a marriage counselor. I'm going to be talking about our marriage. And so I would think it might help if you're there, but if you're not, that's okay. I can't force you to do something, but I'm going to go do that. And I'm going to work on the marriage.
I'll have to say it's the first time I've ever heard that. But it makes sense.
It works. And look, it's not about trying to coerce somebody. I mean, it's like, no, I'm going to work on the marriage. I mean, I'm that's what I'm going to do. And since you're half of it, I hope that you're there. What does that say when somebody says, no, I'm not working on this. It's all you. You got to do all the changing. It's not me. Well, a relationship is two people. It doesn't mean one person doesn't have a lot more work to do than the other, but it's still two people.
A technique may be to say, you're right, but I'd like you to be there to help me figure out what those changes are that need to be fixed.
I agree. It's a starting place. It's a starting place.
And I've never been, and maybe, who knows, I think we all probably could use some fine tuning or a lot of tuning, but I think half the battle is just getting where you're able to have common ground, whether it's the two of you by yourself or with the help of someone professionally trained to do that. Because once that happens, and then you can start fixing, healing, or
building.
Sometimes some things, the goal is to build, but sometimes some things cannot be rebuilt. And at that point, for the health of both individuals involved, decisions need to be made at that point, I would think. If neither one of you feels like this can be rebuilt, staying together in something that's unhealthy is just going to make you unhealthier. It's put stress on you. It's going to affect your mental well-being. The goal is hopefully to fix it, but by the divorce rate, I don't know. People are either in a whole bunch of unfixable and relationships that really weren't that strong to begin with, or they've quit before they were really ready.
I think the divorce rate's high because people just quit. They just like, I remember once I was sitting in a bar in New York, and there was a guy having I don't know, I don't know if it was a bachelor party or something. I don't know. And him saying, I was sitting there and I was listening to him, the groom to be, talking to his best friend. And these guys were kind of D-bags, honestly. They just were, and I just thought, oh, that's a recipe. But he goes, man, how much is the marriage going to cost you? And the guy looks at him and he's not jokingly, he goes, it's going to be expensive, but it's probably not going to be as expensive as the divorce.
Wow.
And I just thought, like, why bother with getting married if that's your attitude? What's the point of that? And so we get into whole prenups, and we can talk about that. I got some questions about prenuptial agreements and ways to navigate that. That's a whole nother conversation. There are ways to navigate that successfully. There's ways to destroy that very quickly, destroy your relationship with that. So you got to be, tactful and careful. And I understand prenups, and I understand why people do them. I'm not against them. But there's a way to do that tactfully, and there's a way to do that really, disgracefully. But it's like that attitude. It's like, why would you bother getting married? Is it societal pressure? It's what you're supposed to do. It's so you look good, or you appease somebody else, or, I think you really got to look in the mirror and have a conversation. I don't think everybody should be married. I don't.
No. When I hear the term, or I hear people say, well, if it doesn't work out, we can just go our separate ways. I'm going, dude, you're already halfway out the door.
Yeah.
You've already kind of set the stage for it. So the first time things get rough, a rough patch, and it will happen, you're already going to go, hey, well, it just isn't going to work.
I think I'll just do something else. Yeah. I mean, I guess if you both feel that way, that's fine. I mean,
then why'd you get married?
Right. But, but then there's the other side where it's like people are just like, I'm going to stay, no matter what. And it's just a hopeless situation, where it's like, so you just want to be unhappy. You just want to torture yourself and then set a shitty example for your kids.
Yes.
I mean, so it's like, this, when do you stay? When do you go? I think that's where therapy really is useful in coming to terms with that. And there is a way to uncouple. They call it conscious uncoupling. And it's a big, people kind of laugh at it, but it's real. I mean, there is a way to do that successfully and tactfully. And then there's a way to do that horribly. And, the worst thing I see is where people just are going to fight it out and they're going to lose all their money to the attorneys because they can't come to an agreement.
That's the only real winner right there.
The lawyers are happy to take everything, and they will if you can't work it out. I've seen people take all of their money and literally give it to the lawyers, so they both end up with nothing, and the attorneys end up with everything. It's like it's just because they can't get out of their own ego, can't get out of the way. It's just it's craziness. It's just, and it leads to such unhappiness and depression and anxiety and time is a limiting resource here. Got to use it wisely.
If you were to boil us all down, like we always do at just about the end of every podcast, to one thing, what would be the one thing that would help when you're in a situation like this the most? What would you recommend based on everything you've seen and done?
Focus on enhancing your communication. Foster more emotional connection with those little bids, just little things. And manage your conflict constructively. That's where getting help, a mediator, a therapist, can help. So work on the communication. Don't go for the big move. Go for the little moves of connection. Those little bids. It's just like little plus ones. Even it's just like making a cup of coffee for your partner, or just giving them a kiss on the cheek before they leave, or just holding their hand. Reach across and hold their hand. That can really be healing and really, really repairing for relationships. And if that other partner is not reciprocated, you really need to, go get help with that. And, if you're sick, you're going to go to the doctor, hopefully. Why should it be any different if your relationship is suffering?
It's not a sign of weakness.
Nope.
We all need help, whether it's financial, medical, emotional. We can't fix everything ourselves, and sometimes somebody else can see things that neither one of us can see ourselves.
Yeah.
We've come to a close of another podcast. As always, please tell your friends, hit the like button, leave a review, send in comments, podcast@LiftAffect.com. Yeah, just look at the title of our podcast.
There you go.
There you go. We thank you and we appreciate everything. Keep them coming. Until the next one, have a great day. Have a great week. See ya.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the LiftAffect podcast. If you want to dive deeper into this episode and every episode, go to our website, liftaffect.com/podcast. If you're enjoying the show, we would love it if you'd follow us on Spotify and rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate your support. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all with the ID Matthew McNeil. This show is brought to you by LiftAffect, a clinical mental health and consulting company that assists air carriers, corporate flight departments, pilot unions, and commercial pilots by providing comprehensive psychotherapy and mental skills coaching services to pilots with mental health and mental performance-related issues. Visit LiftAffect.com, that's LiftAffect.com, to book your free consultation. And finally, this podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of counseling, psychotherapy, medicine, or any other healthcare service, including the giving of medical advice. No therapeutic or provider-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and any materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining advice for any psychological or medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the LiftAffect podcast.